Are there any constituency statements by honourable members? And I call the member for Maribyrnong.
Thank you. One of the upsides of the last year and a half with COVID has been the ability to spend some time at home with the family and reconnecting with the community by walking the streets, in my case of Ascot Vale and Moonee Ponds and Travancore, down by the Maribyrnong River and the Moonee Ponds Creek. So when it's come time again at Christmas to reach out to the locals, to wish them a safe and happy festive season, I wanted to send them something truly unique and local. This is how I came to meet 14-year-old artist Charlie Jackman. You see, Charlie's not just your average high school student. He, for starters, is a killer artist. He's also a brother, a son and a friend. And Charlie is proudly autistic, to quote his own words. By day, Charlie is a student at Over Newton College in Keilor, a school that has championed Charlie's abilities as a student, as an artist and as a person. And out of school hours, Charlie runs his own online art business. It's called Charlie by Art. He's had art commissioned by the Victorian Premier, Dan Andrews. He has an instinctual ability to capture the world around him in his drawings. For me and for the entire Maribyrnong electorate, Charlie has drawn a spectacular vista of the area, across the famous showgrounds, a river and the Melbourne city skyline. A brilliant and detailed perspective of Melbourne that not everyone gets to see. I'm very proud to share his remarkable work with my constituents. Charlie lives with his mum Sue, his dad Scott and his brother Nate. Sue says Charlie's early efforts at art didn't give too much away about his talent. The very young Charlie hated both paint and painting. It wasn't until 9 that his artistic virtuosity came to light as a drawing artist. Through his art, we see the world through Charlie's eyes, and he truly looks at the world through a unique but brilliant lens. Charlie's also very disarming. When I met him last month, he cut to the chase and asked him how I had coped with the 2019 election. It may have been direct, but it was a question lathered in kindness and care and interest. I think it's fantastic to see a young autistic man making his mark, defining the world on his terms, defining his independence and his identity. As I said to Charlie, it's not just about the destination, it's about the journey. I hope that many more Australians get to see this young man's amazing craft and his amazing work. And perhaps we might redefine our sense of what it is to have autism and redefine our views that we see people with autism.
I call the member for Mitchell.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. On Friday, 8 October, the annual Mitchell Youth Leadership Forum, which has widely been successful over the last 20 years, was again held as a huge success. This year, however, it was a testimony of how, under difficult and restrictive conditions due to the lockdowns and the restrictions of the pandemic in Sydney, 132 students representing 13 local schools in my electorate met virtually for a full day of leadership. MYLF has not skipped a beat during the pandemic as school principals, speakers, sponsors, volunteer leaders, the steering committee, everyone stepped up to produce an exceptional interactive virtual program incorporating breakout rooms and focus on our 3 core values of service, integrity and courage. The forum is unique to any other youth leadership endeavour by placing Year 11 students in an unfamiliar environment with their peers for a 2.5-day live live-in program where they participate in developing leadership skills, team-building activities and discussions about our 3 core values of service, integrity and courage. But the alternative format this year ensured the forum was still able to support a cohort of this year's Year 11 student leaders and provide them with an engaging opportunity to develop their leadership skills during a year where we need the development of our leaders, especially with youth mental health issues, more than ever before. I'd like to thank our 13 participating schools, including the developing of the leaders of the future: Balcombe Hills High, Castle Hill High, Galston High, Hills Grammar, Kellyville High, Marion Catholic College, Model Farms High, Muirfield High, Northholme Grammar, Northmead Kappa High and Norwest Christian College, Redfield College and Tangara School for Girls. Special thanks to the principals who've supported the Forum for 20 years now and the Forum's values, and continue to support our excellent leadership program. Keynote speakers on this day included Matt Kershaw, Barnaby Howarth, great supporters of the Forum who inspire students with their own remarkable stories of overcoming their own life battles, including the students realising the values needed to be an effective leader. I also want to thank the committee, the ongoing passionate committee of former leaders and pupils who make the Forum a great success, and our sponsors, Nature Sunshine Products, Australia, Swift Consulting, Castle Towers QIC, all of whom contributed to this year's Forum and the success and the vision of developing our leaders of tomorrow. Leaders of the present have a distinct responsibility to encourage and support the leaders of tomorrow. And I want to thank all of the students who've come back year in, year out to help develop their peers and bring forward student leaders and leaders of the future, developing their skills in a positive and collaborative environment. I'm glad to be able to witness this action, support it as the local member and the president of the Forum. It's so proud to see what has been achieved over the last 20 years and the leadership skills that have been developed. I look forward to seeing the achievement of these students through this very difficult year in supporting their peers with the mental health challenges they faced, with the peer challenges they faced in a year unlike any other.
I call the member for Lalor.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. Well, Deputy Speaker, I want to use my time this morning to say a very warm welcome to the newest constituents arriving into the seat of Lalor, and they are people arriving from Afghanistan after the fall of Kabul. I want to thank our amazing community groups who have locally reached out to support our new residents after they've had to flee their home country. There are lots locally helping them establish themselves in our community and in our nation. And while there are too many to name, I would thank the faithful at the Gurdwara Sahib Tarnek Temple for inviting me in to prepare meals for these families on their arrival. It is with that generous spirit that the Gurdwara does this work. I also want to pay tribute to AIMS and the settlement services they are providing, and the Werribee Community Education Centre, who are working with these new arrivals, getting them into their English language classes very briskly. Already, some of the arrivals have found jobs and are taking classes at night to better place themselves in Australia. I want to thank CEO Jenny Barrera for keeping me updated and for the invitation to come and see this important work in person. But I would also bring to the House's attention that while this is wonderful to see, there are those locally who are spending hours worrying about relatives still in Afghanistan. I want to thank my office staff who are working diligently with families to have their visa processes brought to light and shared with the ministers responsible. The government's response to this issue has, in short, been disappointing, and I know that that feeling is shared by families in my electorate. Some of the stories of those still in Afghanistan bring a tear to my eye when I think of them every day. Deputy Speaker, I also want today to talk about Labor's NBN policy that we're going to take to this election. We have dropped to 59th in the tally in terms of internet speeds. Now, let's face it, this is Australia. If we dropped to 59th in the Olympic medal tally, there'd be a Royal Commission. Well, fortunately for us, we have a fabulous shadow minister who's in the chamber today. And I want to assure the people in my electorate that the 8 years that they've been complaining about what this government's done to bake in the digital divide in communities across this country have been heard, continually heard by Labor. We will secure more families and businesses quality high-speed internet by extending full fibre NBN access to 1.5 million premises. 90% of Australians in the fixed line footprint will have access to world-class speeds by 2025. Labor's got your back. This government doesn't.
I call the member for Brisbane.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. Since the opening of Brisbane Airport's second runway, many Brisbane residents have been bearing the brunt of excessive and unreasonable aircraft noise from new flight paths overhead. So I've been fighting hard for Brisbane residents on this issue to ensure that these concerns are heard and addressed. I welcome the recent tabling here in the Parliament of a petition signed by over 2,000 residents of Greater Brisbane, many of them constituents in the electorate of Brisbane, expressing their frustration at the level of noise and disruption they're experiencing. I also welcome the recent report by the Commonwealth Aircraft Noise Ombudsman, which vindicates what residents have been saying in two key respects: that there were inadequacies over a long period of time in the consultation and engagement process with the community, and that the reality of the new runway in operation is not consistent with what some suburbs were led to believe they would experience. I want to thank the Brisbane Flight Path Community Alliance for their work on both fronts and for continuing to meet and work with me so constructively. My focus continues to be on finding real and practical solutions to reduce unnecessary and unreasonable noise. So when Air Services post-implementation review of the new runway was brought forwards, which was a good decision, I made a submission containing 10 potential solutions and ideas that might help residents. That included the establishment of a new independent body to hold operators and regulators to higher account. I'm pleased to say that the new body, called the Brisbane Airport Community Forum, has now been established and it's up and running. The forum is importantly independent of the airport operators and the regulators, and it is running a process separate to Air Services PIR, but ultimately, of course, it can feed solutions in to Air Services PIR when appropriate. What we needed to do, Deputy Speaker, was to upend the governance, to put the emphasis back on experts to answer community concerns and to work on proposals, because, Deputy Speaker, it was entirely unreasonable to expect residents and lay people to have to become the aviation experts and to find ideas and drive for this sort of change. So the forum right now, Deputy Speaker, is taking direct submissions from the public as well as bringing in the experts to work on potential solutions. I do recommend that any resident from anywhere around Brisbane, not just the electorate of Brisbane, who's been impacted by aircraft noise, gets involved in the forum process and makes a submission. Submissions are still open. And I'm looking forward to the first report from the Community Forum, and I hope it contains ultimately good recommendations for real practical actions and change that can help to ensure ultimately that Brisbane remains the very best place in Australia to live, to work, to play, to raise a family, to start a business and to retire. Thanks, Deputy Speaker.
I call the member for Bean.
Deputy Speaker, members of this chamber have an opportunity to provide an early Christmas present to retail, warehouse and transport workers by joining with the SDA, TWU and unions across the world calling for an end to poor working conditions and low wages for Amazon workers. As Black Friday sales begin this week, not just in America but also here in Australia and many other countries, Amazon workers will face undeniable pressure and stress to fulfil orders around the world. The race to the bottom on wages and secure jobs is a global problem, and Amazon is a prime example. Amazon Flex drivers aren't even getting minimum wage, have no rights and are pressured to drive dangerously overloaded cars to avoid being sacked on a whim. This week is a reminder that Amazon workers who kept filling and delivering orders throughout the pandemic deserve respect and have a right to a safe workplace. While profits soar for Amazon, doubling in the first half of 2021 compared to 2020, workers are left with little or no pay rises and working unimaginable hours without breaks. In too many of their sites across the globe, Amazon workers are forced to work in unsafe environments, often too afraid to speak out or join their union in fear of retaliation. As a union for Amazon online retail workers, the SDA has worked tirelessly to stop the Americanisation of wages and working conditions in Australia. The TWU is also working hard to protect safe standards for transport workers who deliver Amazon's goods to consumers. From the day Amazon opened their first site in Australia, the SDA has worked to enforce and lift safety standards on those sites. The union has taken legal actions to stand up for workers who face discrimination at work and has relentlessly pursued safety standards in Amazon's Australian sites. The SDA and the TWU form the Online Retail and Delivery Workers Alliance to further efforts to ensure that workers are protected in every step of the supply chain. A secure job with a fair wage does not have to be a thing of the past for Australian workers. It should be the Australian way. The SDA and TWU would not stand by and allow Australian working conditions to be undermined. It's time to make Amazon pay. And Deputy Speaker, a quick shout out to the magnificent Genesis Owusu, ex-MacKillop College student and Bean constituent, up for 6 ARIA awards tonight, including for Best Artist and Album for his debut, Smiling with No Teeth, off the back of winning Triple J Album of the Year. As someone used to say, do yourself a favour.
I call the member for Robertson.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker, and I rise to update the House on 2 very important commitments that was made at the last election by the Morrison government for my electorate of Robertson. We made a first-of-its-kind commitment of $945,000 for the new and innovative Health on the Streets, or HOTS program. This initiative involves a mobile health clinic for people experiencing homelessness, and it takes healthcare and support services to those sleeping rough across the Central Coast. It works to ensure that when it comes to vital healthcare across the Central Coast, no one falls through the gaps. The team of registered nurses provide comprehensive health assessments, including primary health, public and sexual health, mental health and drug and alcohol services. In the last 12 months, Health on the Streets have had over 1,300 clinical interventions, helped to link over 100 people to ongoing GP-led care, and conducted around 900 referrals to other health services. Outreach workers have also assisted 30 people to be permanently housed, with an additional 33 people helped to attain temporary accommodation options. And this, every single person who is able to find that support, Deputy Speaker, this has made such a tremendous difference to their lives. Health on the Streets has been particularly important during the COVID-19 pandemic, with the team detecting 5 active cases in our community and administering over 33 vaccinations. The team partnered with organisations including our local Coast Shelter and Mary Max Place, and they're a truly valuable part of our community. I really want to thank all of those involved for their genuine passion and care for others, and the direct and important impact that this service is having on many people across the Central Coast. And, I personally am a very strong advocate of the work that this particular service does, and will continue to advocate very strongly for it. I'd also like to inform the House that funding agreement between the Federal Government and Central Coast Council has been signed for the $8.25 million redevelopment of the Peninsula Recreation Precinct in Umina Beach, which means that Council will have the funds to get on with the job of planning and constructing these new improved facilities. This has been a very frustrating experience for stakeholders engaged in this process, Deputy Speaker. It is going to mean, though, with the funding agreement signed, it will include a new skate park, 2 separate sports facilities, each with a club room, storage, change rooms, toilets and a canteen and surrounding works. They're really important, these upgrades, for the Umina United Eagles Soccer Club, Umina Bunnies Junior Rugby League Club and the Southern Spirit Cricket Club, who have worked to make this project a reality, and of course so many young skateboarders here on the peninsula who really need to see this skate park upgraded. We know that the clubs that use Umina Oval as well are growing at a very rapid pace, and they need the amenities to state-of-the-art. That's why it's so important that we work to get the funding agreement right. I want to see the shovels on the ground as soon as possible, and will continue to advocate till this project is delivered.
I call the member for Greenway.
Deputy Speaker, Western Sydney was at the centre of the New South Wales lockdown. We were subjected to some of the harshest regulations in New South Wales and indeed the nation. Our small businesses closed their doors. Our workers, particularly in construction and other authorised industries, had to comply with complex rules that workers in the eastern suburbs were not subject to. And on top of this, we were denied a mass vaccination hub in my electorate of Greenway. Many residents had to travel significant distances in very trying and worrying circumstances to get vaccinated. But in spite of all this, we did the right thing. My electorate went from having one of the highest number of COVID cases to becoming the most vaccinated electorate in the entire country. Just imagine how long the Liberals would have kept Western Sydney in lockdown if we did not achieve such high levels of vaccination. Just imagine how much additional damage the Liberals would have done to small businesses who were forced to close. And adding insult to injury, we are now just beginning to learn that throughout this difficult ordeal, the people of Western Sydney were treated differently and misled by the Liberals. Just this week, media reports reveal that Dr Kerry Chant urged the New South Wales Liberal government not to treat Western Sydney any differently from the rest of Greater Sydney. Yet despite this, the Liberals chose to target the harshest restrictions on Western Sydney, imposing them in a manner that was inconsistent with the health advice. And in even more insult, it has also been revealed that the $5 billion so-called Western Sydney COVID Projects Fund promised by the New South Wales Liberals in September simply does not exist. Instead, the promised funds from the privatisation of WestConnex are being used to pay off debt racked up by the Liberals. The question remains, why does this New South Wales Liberal government feel like they can get away with misleading Western Sydney residents time and time again? This is not costless. It's been reported that the areas subject to the harshest lockdowns are experiencing the highest rates of joblessness, including many areas in Western Sydney. Now that the lockdown is over, the resilient small businesses of Western Sydney are gaining momentum and things are beginning to feel normal again. But our people won't forget that the Liberals were not upfront with them throughout the lockdown. Western Sydney expects its politicians to keep promises and be held accountable for the decisions they make, and they have every right to expect this during a pandemic. I thank the people of Western Sydney, and in particular the people of Greenway, for their intelligence and consistent desire to do the right thing by their community. It's clear we can't trust the Liberals with taxpayers' money, their ability to make decent decisions or even keep their word. That's why we need an Albanese Labor government to build back even stronger in Western Sydney. If anyone can come out of this pandemic even stronger, it is the good people of Western Sydney.
I call the member for O'Connor.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. And today I want to recognise the Morrisons government's effort to re-energise the main streets in the Wheatbelt regions of my electorate of O'Connor. Following the recent WA redistribution, O'Connor now has more main streets than any other electorate nationwide, with well over 100 towns spread over 57 regional and remote municipalities. The government is acutely aware of the importance of main streets to the continued prosperity and vitality of regional towns nationwide. If you were to drive through the WA Wheatbelt just a decade ago, you would see that many main streets, which had grown grand on the back of sheep and wheat, had become somewhat shabby and jaded. But thanks to the grassroots investment by the Commonwealth, that's changing in many Wheatbelt towns. Just last week, I opened a major upgrade to the Memorial Park that adjoins Parade Street, the main thoroughfare of the Wheatbelt town of Pingelly. That $1.6 million upgrade was largely funded by $1 million from the $301 million extension to the Drought Communities program. It has transformed a tired community and economic asset into a vibrant park that will encourage passersby to slow down and stop in the town, and that in turn will develop Pingelly's economy. Elsewhere in the Wheatbelt, $2.1 million was announced under Round 5 of the Building Better Regions Fund to upgrade Barrack Street, the main street of Merredin, as well as Bates Street. Like the project in Pingelly, the Merredin initiative will greatly improve parkland in the town centre. The $4.27 million project will provide pedestrian-friendly spaces and improve the profitability of nearby businesses. Then in the town of Beverley, Deputy Speaker, which is currently in the electorate of Pearce, my good friend sitting here on duty in the House, has been provided under the Local Roads and Community Infrastructure Program to provide pedestrian and wheelchair safety, to provide public arts, trees and seating in the town's main thoroughfare of Vincent Street. The Local Roads and Community Infrastructure Program is really underrated, Mr Speaker. Under this year's budget, all 57 local government areas in my electorate will receive funding from Phase 3 of that highly successful funding program. Under Phase 1 and 2, the Shire of Cuballing received $114,000 to upgrade Francis Street in the small town of Poppaninning. Again, the idea is to get fast-moving travellers to slow down in the town's main street and take a breather for the use of local facilities. And finally, Deputy Speaker, the Shire of Bruce Rock has been very innovative in installing temporary parklets to provide outdoor seating and dining near food businesses on Johnson Street. That trial proved a great economic and social success, and $126,000 was provided to make these street parklets permanent. So thanks to these three visionary programs aimed at building better regions, cushioning the impact of drought and providing community infrastructure, many main streets in the WA Wheatbelt are returning to the vibrancy of their heyday.
I call the member for Kingston.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. Look, I am very proud to be a member of the Labor Party, a party that has stood up for working people in this country for many, many decades, and particularly has stood up for the protection of wages and conditions for workers in Australia. Now, of course, while many, both in the union movement and the Labor Party, have fought for better wages and conditions, It is no use if employers out there don't do the right thing and actually pay those wages and conditions that these workers deserve. Deliberately not paying the wages that workers are entitled to is known as wage theft, and this should be criminalised because, of course, deliberately, and I've got to stress this is not an accident, this is deliberately evading and trying not to pay the money owed to workers is outrageous. And in 2019, PricewaterhouseCoopers found that underpayment of Australian workers' entitlements was estimated at $1.35 billion a year. This modelling was based on the Fair Work Ombudsman data that found that workers in essential sectors like retail, construction, social assistance and healthcare are at most at risk of wage theft. Now, if we think about those areas, these are the workers that turned up during the pandemic. During the pandemic, when we had lockdowns around this country, these are the workers that continue to go to work, to put food on our table, to make sure that essential services continue to operate. And of course, ensuring that they get paid what they are entitled to should be a priority of government. But of course, this government would like to put its head in the sand when it comes to wage theft. Well, I just want to share one quick story, the story of Cameron, who lives in the southern suburbs of Adelaide. He was a first-year electrical apprentice, a job he'd gotten with the help of his family or family friend. During his apprentice, Cameron became the victim of wage theft by his employer. In the first year, Cameron's apprenticeship, his employer refused to pay him super, was underpaid between 50 and 60 cents per hour and never got penalty rates for overtime and Sunday work when he completed it. With the help of his union, he was able to win the case, and actually the court decided he should be paid the money he's owed. Unfortunately, the company is evading the court orders, refusing to pay Cameron what he's owed. We need to see government stand up in this. Labor has a plan to criminalise wage theft, and I would encourage the government to do the same.
Are there any constituency statements? And I call the honourable member for Banks.
Well, thank you, Deputy Speaker. Well, Deputy Speaker, the pool at Peakhurst West has a very proud history dating back to the 1960s when the community got together, raised the funds to open that pool. And in that time, many tens of thousands of people have learnt to swim at the pool at Peakhurst West on Ogilvie Street. And for more than half a century, that pool was operated by the community with great success. Now, recently, Deputy Speaker, the pool's management was taken over by Bluefit, and we have had a situation where the pool has not reopened after the end of COVID lockdowns in Sydney. This has been of great concern to me and the community. Deputy Speaker, this morning Bluefit have confirmed that the pool will reopen next Wednesday, the 1st of December. Now, that's a really important development and a very positive thing for our community. I thank Bluefit for doing that. It's the right thing to do. And I want to thank all of the community groups who have helped in bringing attention to this very important issue, Penshurst RSL Swimming Club and many others. But the pool will reopen to community groups next week, and that's a great thing for the community in the Peakhurst area. Deputy Speaker, Oatley Football Club was established in 1975, and it's gone from strength to strength over those years. 8 teams in 1976, 69 teams this year, and a really strong focus on female football, with just on a third of all teams now female, which is fantastic. More than 850 players in the club, and that has grown very substantially in the last 5 years or so. The club has done a tremendous job in promoting football in our community, and I want to thank Belinda Stanton, the President, Lisa Kirby, the Vice President, Antonella Chino, the Secretary, Jason Finlay, the Treasurer, Rob Wild, who was down there recently when I met with the club, and everyone else who puts in so much effort to making Oatley Football Club such a critical part of our community. Deputy Speaker, it's important that mental health services are provided in culturally appropriate ways. And CAS is doing a very important thing in its recent opening of the H-Line mental health phone line service. Now, this service caters particularly for Australians of Chinese background with in-language support for mental health issues for people right across the community. It's a very positive initiative, and I was pleased to attend the launch of H-Line in Peakhurst. I want to thank Dr Bo Zhu, the chair of CAS, Henry Pan, the founding chair, and all of the staff and volunteers at CAS for this important initiative.
I call the honourable member for Newcastle.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. Well, this year we have witnessed a powerful reckoning with tens of thousands of women marching across Australia demanding an end to violence. Brave women who came forward inspired many others to share their stories of violence and harassment. Following a massive public backlash over the Prime Minister's behaviour and under enormous public pressure to act, after ignoring women's safety for 8 long years now, the Morrison government hurried to make new announcements, new appointments. Well, 8 months on, there's very little evidence of delivery. The Prime Minister's promise of extra funding to fight domestic violence has been exposed as yet another heartless con, another hollow announcement from a government with no intention on delivering. We know that throughout COVID-19, there's been an exasperation of domestic and family violence, with almost 1 in 10 women in a relationship experiencing domestic violence during the pandemic, and 2/3 of them saying that it was then when the attack started or indeed got worse. I want to recognise the tireless work of all frontline community-based organisations who give so much of themselves to support women and children fleeing violence, despite a desperate lack of resources from this government. Each and every day you are on the front line, giving women the support, advice and assistance they need to take the most difficult of steps, constrained only by the shameful lack of support and action from this government. I'd particularly like to acknowledge the important work of Nova for Women and Children, Jenny's Place and Walganaga in Newcastle. Like so many services across the country, government funding has not kept up with demand. Frontline workers are crying out for support. That's why the 16 days of activism against gender-based violence is so important. That's why we must pressure this government every day to do better. It's been 8 long years of coalition governments failing to make any impact on putting an end to violence against women and children. That's why it's way past time to be talking about this issue. It is essential that we elevate women's safety to a national priority. That's why an Anthony Albanese Labor government will establish a Family Domestic Sexual Violence Commissioner. We know that's just the beginning. Labor's committed to action and bringing down the rates of violence in our communities. Right now, women are fleeing violence, are being turned away from services because this government has not funded enough workers to help them, and that's not okay. An Albanese Labor government will also fund 500 new community sector workers to support women in crisis, with half of these working in rural and regional communities like mine. That builds on our commitment to provide social housing to those fleeing in violence, 10 days paid domestic violence leave and the implementation of all recommendations for respect at work.
I call the honourable member for Page.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. Deputy Speaker, I'd like to acknowledge Frances Bell Parker. Frances is an artist, a mother and a proud Yagal woman from Maclean. Frances was born to Tony and Lenore. Tony was a highly respected barrister with the Aboriginal Legal Service, and Lenore, a Yagal woman, was a midwife and diabetes educator before retiring and becoming an Anglican priest. Frances has been a practising artist for the past 20 years. Her works include paintings, printing, sculpture, installations and public works. Her art has been exhibited right across Australia and internationally. At just 18, Frances won the Blake Prize. This achievement made her the youngest ever winner and the first Indigenous recipient in the prize's history. Frances has also designed and screened her digital work and Angwiri on the sales of the Sydney Opera House. She's recently been selected for a significant art and storytelling project along the northern beaches of the Sydney Coastline Walk. Frances also carries on the legacy of her late cousin, Jessica Burke, who sadly passed away in 2019. Jess grew up in the Northern Beaches, and Frances has said her current project is another way for her to continue her legacy, using elements of Jess's designs in her artwork. Frances said that she feels like Jess is still with her and guiding her. Frances calls Yagle Country her home with her husband Mason, 2 children, Livy and Addie. Congratulations, Frances. Deputy Speaker, I'd like to acknowledge Pat Leadbeater, who was recently given life membership of the Maris Brothers Rugby League Club. Pat has been actively involved with the Maris Brothers from a young age. He got involved at just the age of 10 when he started playing cricket. Then at 15 he joined the baseball team. He's also a life member of the Baseball, Cricket and the Far North Coast Umpires Association. In 2015, Pat was presented with the inaugural Legends Award from the Far North Coast Baseball Association for his services to the game. He's one of 7 children. His siblings are Sue, Paul, Louise, Zelinda, Francesca and Lucy. Despite having an intellectual disability, Pat has lived an independent life and lives in Lismore with his partner Lexi. For 20 years he worked for the Lismore City Council Parks and Gardens. His sister has said he is humble and knows everyone and describes him as a local living legend. Pat, thank you for your contribution and devotion to our local sport, and congratulations on your life membership. Deputy Speaker, I'd like to acknowledge Gail Sear from Casino, who is retiring from Quong Sings after 50 years. Gail has fitted and assisted many generations of the women in the lingerie department. She will work for her last shift at Quong Sings on Christmas Eve. Her daughter Kylie and Gail have said she's always been dedicated to her customers and loves what she does. I know that her daughters, Kylie and partner Sean, Lisa and partner Midge, and her grandkids, Harrison, Chelsea, Jake and Mia, are all proud of you and looking forward to spending more time with you.
I call the honourable member for Cooper.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. If I can get my mask out of my earring. Thank you. I rise to inform the chamber about a constituent of mine, BB. She's a young woman in her mid-20s. She's articulate, she can navigate bureaucracy, she is close to her family, and right now she's stuck in Pakistan. She flew to Afghanistan to marry her fiancé in July. Of course, we know what happened next. In mid-August, Kabul fell to the Taliban. This put so many people in danger, particularly those who had helped international like Australia and those who had worked in Afghanistan's courts, universities, media and many other workplaces. BB tried to get out. She went to the airport with her Australian passport. She followed all the instructions, but of course, as we know, it was mayhem. In BB's words, the situation was horrific and chaotic. She repeatedly emailed DFAT to get advice on getting out of Afghanistan and bringing her immediate family members, whom she has advised me were in considerable danger. But she wasn't able to get a timely response from the government department. Her family members worked in the previous Afghani government as a Supreme Court judge and a police prosecutor. So she fled across the border with her family and only a pair of shoes and some clothing. She told me it was a very difficult journey. She said that as an Australian citizen, people were not willing to offer her shelter as they were afraid the Taliban would find out. Her immediate family members and fiancé kept her safe. She doesn't want to leave them to their fate in Pakistan, which would potentially mean they'd be deported back to Afghanistan to the possibility of significant punishment and violence. BB and her brothers in Australia have sponsored her Afghani family members and fiancé for refugee and humanitarian visas. And now they wait, and they will have to continue to wait. Meanwhile, Labor is seeking urgent clarity on the number of Afghan nationals that will be resettled in Australia, given the ongoing and growing uncertainty regarding the government's commitment. The government's offer of 3,000 visas is not enough. We have a moral obligation to the people of Afghanistan, given our recent shared history. If we are elected, Labor will abolish temporary protection visas and safe haven enterprise visas. We will give people with those visas permanent protection to stay in Australia and establish their lives with stability. We will double our intake of refugees. And crucially, we will not subject refugees to indefinite detention. Numbers are important, Deputy Speaker. 3,000 is not enough because behind every number there is a story. And in all of the emails that I and my staff have received, we hear a young woman typing out emails while scared and in hiding. Thank you.
Call the honourable member for Riverina.
Mr Speaker, Sarah Lloyd was a beautiful, caring, confident, vivacious young Riverina woman. She was loved by many, especially her parents Daniel and Tracy and family. Early on Saturday morning, 12 August 2017, Sarah lost her life in a crash on a country road. She was only 19, just 19. Her whole life ahead of her. So much potential just torn away, instantaneously, unfairly. We mourn for Sarah as we grieve for all families who have had loved ones stolen from them because of road tragedies. While Sarah loved to dress up and looked fabulous when she did, she was equally comfortable in greasy, oily overalls. You see, Sarah was an apprentice motor mechanic and a hard-at-it Aussie rules player. She wasn't your average young lady, but at the same time, she was one of us. She was all of us. Her dad is a genuine country bloke, a farmer, a doer. With Sarah, you could take the girl out of Mangapla, where she was from, but you could never take the Mangapla out of the girl. Country to the core, whether in high vis or high heels. There is now a Sarah Lloyd Scholarship Fund in her honour, with $2,000 awarded each 16 July, her birthday, to a New South Wales female in a non-traditional trade to help them complete their apprenticeship. Given the circumstances of Sarah's passing, it did not come as any surprise to me to see that Daniel, her dad, took exception to a recent social media post by the member for Moreton. On November 1, the Brisbane-based Labor MP tweeted, "My grandfather was a grader driver during the Great Depression. If a road hasn't had a grader on it since the 30s, why on earth would a responsible federal government make it a priority now while the population in the bush is decreasing?" This was in response to the Liberal Nationals' $150 million Remote Roads Upgrade pilot program. The funding targets unsealed roads throughout regional Australia, many of which have not been upgraded since the Great Depression, Mr Lloyd wrote. Just proves how anti-rural the ALP really are. Practically states stuff the safety of people in remote areas. I say to the opposition, we do care about country people. They are overrepresented in the road toll. That is why we have invested record funding into regional roads, highways, byways and backtracks. Better roads save lives, lives of young people in particular. Young people such as Sarah, who have so much to live for, so much more to give. And as for the ALP MP's claim that country population is declining, that is untrue. A net 43,000 Australians moved to regional areas from capital cities in 2020, and those statistics come from the Australian Bureau of Statistics. So we know they're right, we know they're accurate. Better roads save lives and the country population is increasing.
I call the honourable member for Wills.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. A big part of the last 3 years has been about working for my constituents, the people of Wills, and today I'm just going to share a few examples of how when you listen to people in your community about what matters to them and then you work with them, progress can be made. There's some wonderful locals in the suburb of Fawkner in my electorate who've been campaigning to save the Fawkner pool. The Save Fawkner Outdoor Pool Group has campaigned tirelessly for a full refurbishment of the Fawkner Leisure Centre. I first met up with the group in July this year as they were campaigning against plans to reduce the size of the 50-metre outdoor pool. For constituents in the northern suburbs of my electorate, it can be very hard to get to the beach on those hot summer days. For my family and so many others that live in those northern suburbs, it's the local pool where we spend some of those hot summer days with our families to relieve the heat and have some fun. Now, I've been advocating directly to the local council and I've worked very closely with the group. I've even helped collect some of the thousands of signatures on their petition. The power of community organising and the effort that was made has seen the local council commit to a full refurbishment of the Fawkner Leisure Centre. Importantly, with no cutback in amenities and the 50-metre outdoor pool retained, ensuring Fawkner gets their fair share. So I want to say congratulations to everyone involved in that campaign, particularly Jenny and Demir and Anna and so many others. Well done. In another part of the northern suburbs of my electorate, I've been listening to a lot of local traders in Hadfield and Glenroy who want road upgrades at the West Street shops to bust congestion and make the roads safer. The intersection at West Street and Glenroy Road is notorious. It's very dangerous. There have been numerous accidents there and near misses over the years. The road design also causes cars to back up for hundreds of metres during peak times, entirely blocking off access to the shops. So for traders like Pino at West Street Cafe, or Charles at Bond Meats, or Sam and Claudia at Cafe Stradina, and so many others, the poor road design is actually hurting their business. Now, I've raised this matter in some depth with the local council, urging them to act. They're looking at some of the plans around redoing this, and I'll continue to advocate for those upgrades on behalf of local business. I've also met with the Scale It Down campaign. These are wonderful Brunswick locals who want to propose apartment development scaled down to reduce the impact on the Gilpin and Clifton Parks in Brunswick. There are over 1,000 petitioners who've campaigned against overdevelopment in Brunswick, and in an urban electorate like mine, overdevelopment is a constant challenge, and I've made representations to the state government calling on the size of the developments to be reviewed. Now, this group is a passionate bunch. They think of others, they think of their community, and they work really well together. It's been a great privilege to serve these residents of Wills in this place and to work on what matters to our local community. Thank you.
Call the honourable member for Calare.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. Today I rise to pay tribute to one of our region's much-loved and highly respected leading citizens, the matriarch of the National Party in the Central West, a tireless volunteer and dedicated community member, the late Kay Martin OAM. 91-year-old Kay was the spiritual leader of the Nationals in our area. I recently attended Kay's funeral held at Kenobi, her farm near Rydal, and the centre of so much joy and happiness throughout her life. It was the location of many National Party meetings, social functions and volunteer headquarters over the great many decades Kay dedicated to the party. It was a fitting send-off for a wonderful woman who was lovingly referred to as the Little General. This title encapsulates the very essence of Kay. She loved and lived for service and politics. In fact, Kay featured in my very first political advertising campaign in 2010-11. To have Kay on your team meant you'd already won the race. She made things happen. She brought people together to make her community and our country a better place. She left no stone unturned in her quest to be part of something great that would benefit her much-loved region. Kay was born Catherine Fay Kennett. She was known as Fay until she decided Kay was it. Her early days were spent in Orange, where she was known as Toots. Kay went on to study physical education in Sydney before the call of the country saw her return to Orange as sports mistress at the then PLC. She and her late husband John had 5 children: David, Andrew, twins Jonathan and Kate, and Stuart. Her family speaks of a splendid wife, mother, grandmother, sister and aunt, generous to the core, hard-working, with boundless energy, stoic and determined. Kay loved her family, and she also loved the National Party. She lived and breathed the party's values, strong representation and positive outcomes. The chair of the Lithgow branch and Calare FEC, Peter Pilbeam, says you couldn't find anyone more dedicated to the party than Kay. Kay Martin exemplified service. A member of the New South Wales Nationals for more than 50 years. She was an honorary life member since 1995, past secretary of the Lithgow branch and held countless other executive positions. And it didn't stop there. Kay was a life member of the Rydal Show Society, where she was the showgirl chaperone for many years. She was also a life member of the Wallerawang Lidsdale CWA. She was heavily involved in the Rydal RFS Brigade, Rydal Village Association and the Rydal Union Church. Kay volunteered her time at local preschools and also local schools. 3 years ago, Kay was honoured with an Order of Australia Medal for service to her community and the National Party, and she wore it with pride recently on her 90th birthday. On behalf of this Parliament, I extend my sincere condolences to Kay's family, including Andrew and Sarah, Jonathan and Julie, Kate and Ian Menz, Stuart and Linda, grandchildren Belinda, Thomas, Emma, William, Kai, Neve, Lachlan and Tom, her sisters Jean, Louise and Susan, brother David and sister-in-law Maureen. Farewell, Kay Martin. She is simply irreplaceable.
Call the honourable member for Canberra.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. I rise today to talk about Labor's plans to fix our national broadband network. And I don't need to tell Canberrans how important this is. We know because we've got some of the worst access to the NBN in this country. The NBN designed by the last was supposed to be a transformational infrastructure project. If implemented as intended, all Australians would now have access to fast, reliable broadband. But Tony Abbott set about destroying Labor's vision for the NBN. Instead of Labor's 21st century fibre to the premises network, we got a mixed match of technologies that doesn't do the job and includes ancient copper networks that simply do not work properly. The result for Australians is some of the worst internet connections in the world. In fact, Australia now ranks 59th for average broadband speeds. That is shocking and unacceptable. Of every capital city in the nation, Canberra, our national capital, has by far the worst NBN infrastructure. Around 70% of the network in our nation's capital is made up of substandard fibre-to-the-node technology, including almost all of my electorate, where this building, our national parliament, is located. No other capital city is nearly this bad. I campaigned earlier this year for the ACT to be included in future NBN upgrades, and I'm glad that 10 Canberra suburbs, 6 in my electorate, were finally included. But it's not good enough, and it never will be under this tired old Liberal government. An Albanese Labor government will secure more Australian families and businesses quality high-speed internet by expanding full fibre NBN access to an extra 1.5 million premises. A Labor government will ensure that 90% of Australians in the fixed line footprint, over 10 million premises, will have access to world-class speeds by 2025. We will also keep the NBN in public hands, keeping internet costs for families affordable while ensuring improvements to the network. Reliable, quality, high-speed internet is not a luxury or a nice-to-have. It's incredibly important in today's economy and society. Labor's expansion will particularly benefit regional Australia, which has been left behind by the Morrison-Joyce government, by providing up to 660,000 additional homes and businesses in our regions with access to optical fibre. And for 30,000 families without access to the internet, Labor will support them with access to free broadband for a year under Labor's plan for Better NBN. We've always known for a long time the impact that not having internet has on disadvantaging school children. And during COVID, this became incredibly clear, with people needing to homeschool just how far behind they could be left without access to decent broadband. So under our plan, eligible families will be identified by schools, state education departments and local community organisations and eligibility validated. Australia should have done it once, done it right and done it with fibre. The coalition of FUBDIT and Labor will fix it.
I call the honourable member for Bass.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. In our role as representatives of our community, we're fortunate to meet ordinary people doing extraordinary things, sometimes amidst distressing or tragic life events. Over the past few months, I've come to know a passionate, driven and remarkable young woman who is working tirelessly to make the world a safer place for children, all in honour of her sister Zoe. Just a few weeks ago, Amanda Duncan launched the Two Sisters campaign, born out of a promise she made as a young girl. When I was 6 years old, I promised Zoe that one day I would grow up and fix the world, which had hurt her so badly, Amanda said at the launch. That little girl grew up, became a nurse and midwife, and is now fiercely determined to change the system from the inside out. In 2001, at the age of 11, Zoe was raped by a doctor at the Launceston General Hospital. And just as we have heard far too many times from victim survivor stories told at the Royal Commission into Institutional Child Sexual Abuse, Zoe's story was not believed by the hospital after the doctor denied the attack and the hospital dismissed the complaint after deeming Zoe was not upset enough for the allegation to be true. Zoe and her parents also faced further challenges when dealing with the police and Tasmania's Child Protection Unit. In the years that followed, Zoe suffered from severe trauma and worsening chronic illness, passing away in 2017 at the young age of 28. The launch of the Two Sisters campaign was held on Friday, November the 12th, on what would have been Zoe's 32nd birthday. Amanda and her parents spoke about the impact that Zoe's abuse had on their entire family. It was powerful, confronting and moving to hear their stories, and that of other survivors who spoke at the launch. Camille Bianchi's podcast, The Nurse, which highlights Zoe's story and that of others who were sexually abused by a nurse at the LGH, has led to an avalanche of other victim survivors speaking out about abuse in other institutions in our state, including the education and juvenile detention system. This has led to our state's current inquiry into child sexual abuse in Tasmanian institutions, and I was pleased to see Tasmanian Health Minister Jeremy Rockliff attend the Two Sisters campaign launch and not shy away from what is a very difficult issue. The aim of the Two Sisters campaign is to ingrain a mantra in institutions of listen, believe, support and report, to ensure trauma-informed training across all government agencies and to improve reporting process and transparency within institutions. We must continue to let survivors speak, have their stories heard and make the changes needed to ensure all children are safe. That a child could be abused in a hospital by the very person in charge of their care is beyond comprehension. We all have a collective responsibility to drive change, and Amanda Duncan is helping to lead the way.
Call the honourable member for Brand.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. Summer is coming, and as happens every year, my electorate of Brand is filling with festivals and markets. Between parliamentary sitting weeks and mandatory quarantine, I haven't been able to attend as many events as I would like. However, I made the most of my 1 week in the community last week by attending the Malibu school markets. I am continually impressed with the students' creativity and enthusiasm, and I started my Christmas shopping early by picking up some hand-printed wrapping paper and snowman tea lights that the students themselves had made. And I want to thank the whole community of the truly remarkable Malibu school. And earlier this month, the Rockingham Beach Cup was held along the Rockingham foreshore. This is Western Australia's first beach horse race, and as always, it was terrific to see many thousands of people on the foreshore cheering on the horses and the jockeys as they thundered along the pristine beach that we all love. Now, events like this would simply not be possible without the work of community organisations and their volunteers. And I want to sincerely thank the Palm Beach Rotary Club and their members for their really hard work in bringing this all together. And also to Rob McGavin, who is integral to the event that is so wonderful for the city of Rockingham. My electorate of Brand, with this beautiful coastline and strong sense of community, never disappoints. Now, last Sunday was a particularly special day in my electorate, with constituent Ivy Esther Grace J turning 100. Ivy was thankfully released from hospital yesterday and celebrated the occasion with her friends and family. Now, while I've heard that she would flatly disagree, I believe Ivy has led quite an extraordinary life. She spent the Second World War stationed at Kent in the UK with the Royal Air Force. While she goes to great pains to point out that she was never on the front line, it is certainly more than most of us have ever experienced to be in Britain at that time. Then, in 1967, she moved with her mother to Western Australia to join her sister and brother-in-law and found work making transformers in a factory in Osborne Park. It was tough manual labour, but she kept at it for many years until retiring to look after her mother, who passed away at 98. Now, at this point, I'm sure everyone is anxious to hear Ivy and her mother's secret to a long life, and I'm sure part of it is the hard work she did at the factory in Osborne Park. I've also heard that Ivy kept up her line dancing for many years, so perhaps that's something all of us in this place could consider for a long and healthy life. It's even been rumoured she appeared on national television at 80 years old, line dancing with her friends. Unfortunately, her family have not been able to find a record of this, so if anyone has seen a group of 80-year-old women line dancing, please get in touch with my office and we'll try and get her family the tape. I'd just like to say a very special happy birthday to Ivy. Thanks to her family for getting in touch, and many happy returns on your 100th.
Thank you. In accordance with Standing Order 193, the time for members' constituency statements has concluded. Call the member for Pearce.
The Federation Chamber do now adjourn.
Is there a seconder? I second the motion. The member for Wills. The question is that the motion be agreed to. I put the question. All that opinion say aye. Aye. To the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The Federation Chamber stands adjourned until 10 a.m. tomorrow.